The crisp autumn wind carried whispers of an extraordinary tale across the rolling hills of Vermont, where one farmer's ordinary morning transformed into a moment that would challenge everything he believed about the wild creatures sharing his land. No one could have predicted that a wounded bear's desperate arrival would spark a journey of compassion that would touch hearts across the community and prove that sometimes the greatest acts of humanity happen in the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning mist clung to the sprawling fields of the Cedar Grove Farm as James Mitchell performed his daily routine, the familiar scent of fresh hay and damp earth filling his lungs. At 62, his weathered hands had worked this land for over 4 decades, every callus and wrinkle telling stories of countless harvests, harsh winters, and the relentless dedication required to keep a family farm alive in modern times. The late September sunrise painted the sky in brilliant strokes of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the ancient maple trees that lined his property's eastern border. James had always taken pride in knowing every inch of his 200-acre farm, from the fertile vegetable fields to the old apple orchard his grandfather had planted. But today, something felt different. The usual morning chorus of songbirds had fallen silent, replaced by an unsettling stillness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Even his trusted border collie, Scout, seemed on edge. Her ears perked and body tense as she stood at attention near the barn entrance. Years of farming had taught James to trust his instincts. When nature fell quiet, it usually meant something was amiss. He paused in the middle of collecting eggs from the henhouse, listening intently to the unusual silence. That's when he heard it, a sound that seemed out of place among the familiar farm noises. A deep, pained groan emanating from somewhere, near the old stone wall that separated his property from the dense woodland beyond. Scout's low growl confirmed his suspicions that whatever was making that sound wasn't one of his farm animals. James's hand instinctively reached for the worn wooden handle of the pitchfork, leaning against the henhouse wall. In all his years of farming, he'd learned to be cautious around unknown situations. Wild animals, especially injured ones, could be unpredictable and dangerous. The sound came again, weaker this time, but unmistakably filled with pain. James felt his heart rate quicken as he carefully made his way toward the stone wall, Scout following closely at his heels. The morning dew had soaked through his work boots, each step leaving a dark impression in the grass. As he approached the wall, the growing light revealed something that made him stop dead in his tracks. There, collapsed against the ancient stones, lay an adult black bear. Its dark fur was matted with blood, and its massive body heaved with labored breaths. James had encountered bears before. It was part of life in rural Vermont, but never like this. The bear's right front leg was badly mangled, with what appeared to be deep lacerations running from shoulder to paw. Fresh blood stained the dewy grass beneath it. James's first instinct was to retreat. Every farmer knew the dangers of approaching an injured wild animal, especially one as powerful as a black bear. But something about the creature's eyes caught his attention. They weren't filled with the wild aggression he'd expect from a wounded predator. Instead, they held a profound exhaustion and what seemed almost like a plea for help. The bear's condition was severe. From his experience helping injured livestock, James could tell the animal was suffering from significant blood loss. The wounds looked fresh, possibly from a confrontation with another bear or perhaps from an encounter with human-made equipment. Whatever the cause, without intervention, the bear's chances of survival seemed slim. Time seemed to stand still as James wrestled with the decision before him. His mind raced through the possibilities and consequences. The logical choice was clear. Call the wildlife authorities and let them handle it. That's what any sensible farmer would do. But something deeper stirred in his heart as he watched the bear's labored breathing, each exhale creating small clouds in the cool morning air. Memories flooded back of his father's words from decades ago. A farmer's duty isn't just to his crops and livestock, son. It's to all the creatures that share this land with us. We're caretakers, not just of our fields, but of the whole circle of life that makes this farm thrive. Those words had shaped James's farming philosophy throughout his life, leading him to adopt sustainable practices and maintain wildlife corridors through his property. Scout whined softly beside him, her earlier growl replaced by what seemed like concern. The border collie's change in demeanor struck James as significant. He'd always trusted his dog's instincts about animals, and her relaxed posture suggested the bear, despite its size and natural predatory nature, posed no immediate threat in its current state. The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center was in Burlington, nearly 2 hours away. Even if he called them now, the bear might not survive long enough for help to arrive. The wounds needed immediate attention, and the morning sun was already warming the air, bringing with it the risk of insects and infection. James thought of his late wife, Sarah, who had worked as a veterinary technician before her passing 5 years ago. She had kept a fully stocked veterinary kit in the barn, insisting that every farm needed to be prepared for medical emergencies. He'd maintained the supplies out of respect for her memory, though he'd never imagined using them on a wild bear. The decision crystallized in his mind as he watched a butterfly land briefly on a wildflower near the bear's head. The delicate creature showed no fear of the powerful predator, a reminder that in moments of vulnerability, nature's usual boundaries could shift in unexpected ways. James knew what he had to do, even if it defied conventional wisdom. Moving. With deliberate calm, he spoke softly to the bear, letting it become accustomed to his voice. "Easy there, big fellow. I know you're hurting, but I think I can help if you'll let me." The bear's eyes tracked his movement, but it made no aggressive moves. Whether from weakness or some deeper understanding, it seemed to accept his presence. James began to formulate a plan. The bear would need immediate first aid, but treating it here in the open wasn't safe for either of them. The old dairy barn, unused since he'd retired his small herd 5 years ago, could serve as a temporary medical ward. It was secure, cool, and private, essential conditions for treating a wild animal. As he assessed the situation, James noticed more details about the bear's condition. Besides the obvious leg wounds, the animal showed signs of exhaustion and dehydration. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, and its eyes had a glazed quality that concerned him. The bear had likely been wandering injured for hours, perhaps days, before collapsing near his farm. The morning sun continued to rise, bringing with it the promise of another warm autumn day. James knew he needed to act quickly. The bear's dark fur would soon begin absorbing heat, adding the risk of heat stroke to its already critical condition. Moreover, his regular farm duties couldn't be neglected for long. The animals needed feeding, and he had deliveries scheduled for the afternoon. Standing slowly, James made his way back to the barn, his mind racing through the supplies he would need. Sarah's medical kit would be essential, but he'd also need ropes, a tarp, and his small tractor with the front loader. Moving a full-grown black bear safely would require careful planning and execution. One wrong move could spell disaster for both him and the injured animal. Scout followed him to the barn, her tail wagging slowly as if she understood the gravity of the situation. James had always believed that dogs could sense the deeper currents of life, the moments when ordinary boundaries needed to bend in service of something greater. Today, his trusted companion seemed to be offering her silent support for the extraordinary task ahead. As James gathered the necessary supplies, he could feel the weight of the morning's discovery settling over him. This wasn't just about saving an injured animal. It was about honoring the interconnected web of life that made his farm more than just a place to grow crops. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most meaningful acts of kindness come wrapped in fur and claws, challenging our preconceptions about the divide between domestic and wild. Inside the old dairy barn, James moved with purposeful efficiency, gathering the essential supplies that would determine the bear's fate. Sarah's veterinary kit, untouched for years, lay exactly where she'd always kept it, on the third shelf of the storage cabinet, next to her collection of medical reference books. As he pulled it down, a cloud of dust scattered in the morning light, streaming through the barn's high windows, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice guiding his actions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The kit's contents remained meticulously organized. Sterile bandages, antibiotics, suture materials, and various medical instruments, all carefully preserved despite the passing years. James added fresh water bottles, clean towels, and the heavy canvas tarp he used for hauling hay bales. The real challenge would be moving the injured bear safely. At least 400 pounds of wild animal, even in a weakened state, demanded careful consideration. James's hands moved automatically to start his old John Deere tractor, the machine's familiar rumble echoing through the barn. The front loader, though usually reserved for moving hay and feed, would serve a very different purpose today. He secured the tarp to the loader's broad metal surface, creating a makeshift stretcher that he hoped would support the bear's weight without causing additional pain. Scout watched from her post by the barn door, her intelligent eyes following his every move. The border collie's herding instincts had always made her an invaluable farmhand, but today she seemed to understand that her role would be different. Instead of controlling and directing, she would need to remain calm and non-threatening to avoid agitating the injured bear. As James collected rope and additional supplies, his mind wandered to the stories his grandfather used to tell about the relationship between farmers and wildlife in the old days. Tales of mutual respect and understanding when the boundaries between wild and domestic weren't quite so rigid. His grandfather had believed that animals could sense genuine intentions, that kindness transcended species barriers in ways science couldn't explain. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows through the barn's dusty interior. Time was critical. James knew the bear's injuries required immediate attention, but moving such a powerful predator demanded perfect execution. One wrong move could spell disaster for both of them. He thought of his neighbor, Tom Reynolds, who would probably call him crazy for even considering this. Tom represented the old school of farming. Anything wild was considered a threat to be eliminated, But James had always seen his role differently. The farm wasn't just about production, it was about stewardship. Every creature, from the smallest beneficial insect to the largest predator, played a part in the delicate balance that made the land thrive. This injured bear, though potentially dangerous, was as much a part of that ecosystem as his crops and livestock. Loading the last of the supplies onto his tractor, James noticed his hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the task ahead. He thought of Sarah again, remembering how she'd handled injured animals with a perfect blend of caution and compassion. "Animals can smell fear," she used to say, "but they can also sense when someone truly wants to help." The drive back to the stone wall seemed to take forever, though it was barely 100 yards. James kept the tractor at its slowest speed, mindful that the noise might startle the bear. As he approached, he could see the animal hadn't moved from its position, though its eyes tracked his approach with alert awareness. Despite its injured state, the bear's powerful presence commanded respect. Scout took up position several yards away, her body language calm but attentive. James had never been more grateful for her steady temperament. A more excitable dog might have complicated an already delicate situation. He parked the tractor at what he hoped was a safe distance and climbed down, speaking in low, soothing tones as he approached the bear. "Easy now, big fellow. We're going to help you, but you'll need to trust me a little." The words were as much to calm himself as the bear. Up close, the injuries looked even worse than his initial assessment. The deep gashes suggested a violent encounter, possibly with farm equipment or another bear. The animal's labored breathing and glazed eyes indicated it was in serious distress. James began unfolding his plan, moving with deliberate slowness. The tarp would need to be positioned under the bear, requiring him to get dangerously close to the injured animal. He remembered Sarah's technique for approaching injured livestock: calm, confident movements, maintaining awareness without showing fear. The bear's eyes never left him as he explained each step in a soft, steady voice. "I'm just going to slide this under you, then we can get you somewhere safe to look at those wounds." The bear's only response was a soft exhale, but James chose to take it as acceptance. With painstaking care, he began working the edge of the tarp under the bear's massive body. The animal shifted slightly, but remained surprisingly cooperative, as if understanding that this strange human truly meant to help. The morning dew had soaked through James's jeans as he knelt in the grass, working the tarp into position. Each movement was a calculated risk, bringing him within inches of powerful jaws and claws that could end his life in seconds. Yet something in the bear's demeanor, a certain resignation or perhaps recognition, kept him focused on the task rather than the danger. Scout maintained her vigilant watch, occasionally whining softly but never breaking her position. Her presence provided an extra measure of security. James knew she would alert him to any change in the bear's disposition. The morning birds had resumed their songs, filling the air with a chorus that seemed to approve of this unusual partnership. With the tarp finally positioned, James faced the next challenge, securing it to the front loader without causing the bear additional pain. The ropes would need to be tight enough to prevent slipping, but positioned to avoid pressing on injured areas. He worked methodically, talking through each step, allowing the bear time to adjust to each new sensation. "Almost ready now. We'll take it nice and slow, get you settled somewhere quiet where we can tend to those wounds." The bear's breathing had steadied somewhat, though James could still see the tension in its powerful muscles. Every farm animal he'd ever treated had shown a similar mixture of fear and trust, the instinctive wariness of pain competing with the recognition of help offered. Operating the front loader required all of James's concentration. Too fast or jerky, and he risked frightening the bear into panic. Too slow, and the prolonged movement might cause additional stress. He found a rhythm, gentle and steady, lifting the massive animal inch by inch from its resting place against the stone wall. The bear remained surprisingly calm during the transfer, though James could see the pain in its eyes as the movement jostled its injuries. He remembered Sarah telling him that wild animals often became more docile when severely injured, their survival instincts somehow recognizing when they needed help. Still, he maintained constant awareness of the bear's reactions, ready to adjust his approach at any sign of distress. The journey to the barn seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. James kept the tractor at its slowest speed, every bump and dip in the ground sending a jolt of anxiety through him as he watched the bear's reactions. Scout trotted alongside, her presence adding a strange normalcy to the extraordinary procession. Approaching the barn, James faced another crucial moment, maneuvering through the wide doors without disturbing his unusual passenger. He'd prepared a space in the old milking parlor where good lighting and drainage would aid in treating the bear's wounds. The cool, dim interior would also help keep the animal calm during examination and treatment. The bear seemed to relax slightly as they entered the barn's shadows, perhaps finding comfort in the enclosed space after its vulnerable position in the open. James carefully lowered the front loader, bringing the tarp-wrapped bear to rest on the clean straw he'd prepared. The morning light filtering through the high windows created an almost sacred atmosphere, as if the old barn had been waiting for just such a moment. Now came the part that would truly test both man and beast, treating the injuries. James had assisted Sarah with enough emergency veterinary procedures to know the basics, but this was different. The bear's massive size and wild nature presented challenges far beyond anything in his experience. Yet as he gathered his supplies and prepared for the task ahead, he felt a strange calm settle over him. James stood in the barn's filtered light, Sarah's medical kit open before him, facing a moment that would challenge everything he knew about helping animals. The bear's dark eyes followed his movements as he laid out supplies, sterile gauze, antibiotic ointment, clean water, and the various instruments he might need. His hands moved with practiced precision, muscle memory from years of watching Sarah. Work taking over despite the unprecedented situation. The first task was assessing the full extent of the injuries. Up close, the damage to the bear's front leg revealed a story of survival. Deep lacerations ran from shoulder to paw, but the pattern suggested something different from his initial guess. These weren't the marks of another bear or farm equipment. They looked more like the aftermath of an encounter with barbed wire, possibly from one of the abandoned properties that dotted the area's backwoods. A memory surfaced of Sarah treating a young deer caught in similar circumstances. The trick, she'd said, is to understand that you're not just treating wounds. You're treating fear, confusion, and trust all at once. Those words guided James now as he began the delicate process of cleaning the bear's injuries, speaking in low, steady tones that seemed to resonate in the barn's hushed atmosphere. "Let's get you cleaned up, friend. Been through quite an ordeal, haven't you?" The bear's only response was a slight shift of its massive head, but something in its posture suggested a willingness to accept help. James worked methodically, first using warm water to clear away dried blood and debris. The bear tensed at the initial contact, but remained surprisingly still, as if recognizing the gentle intent behind the temporary discomfort. Scout had settled into a watchful position near the barn door, her presence adding a sense of normalcy to the extraordinary scene. The border collie's calm demeanor seemed to influence the bear, creating an unexpected bridge between domestic and wild. James remembered Sarah's theories about animals being able to communicate across species barriers in ways humans couldn't fully understand. As he cleaned the wounds, James discovered additional injuries he hadn't noticed initially, minor cuts and scrapes that told of a desperate journey through rough terrain. The bear had traveled far before collapsing near his farm, its survival instinct driving it forward despite mounting pain and exhaustion. The realization added another layer of responsibility to James's impromptu rescue mission. The morning light shifted as clouds passed overhead, creating moving patterns on the barn floor. James found himself working in a state of intense focus, the rest of the world falling away as he attended to each injury. The bear's trust seemed to grow with each passing minute, its breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Even when James had to probe more painful areas, the animal remained cooperative, as if understanding the necessity of momentary discomfort for eventual relief. Sarah's voice seemed to guide his hands as he began applying antibiotic ointment to the cleaned wounds. "Always work from the inside out," she'd taught him, "and never assume you found everything on the first pass." The methodical approach revealed subtle signs of infection in some of the deeper cuts, requiring more thorough treatment than he'd initially planned. The bear's size presented unique challenges. What would be a simple procedure on a farm animal became complex when dealing with such massive muscle structure and thick fur. James found himself adapting techniques on the fly, drawing on years of practical experience while facing entirely new situations. The work demanded complete concentration. One wrong move could still trigger the bear's defensive instincts, turning a healing session into a potentially lethal encounter. As he worked, James noticed something remarkable. The bear's eyes, initially glazed with pain and fear, had taken on a different quality. There was awareness there, an intelligence that seemed to evaluate his every move. When he needed to adjust the animal's position to access different wounds, the bear would shift slightly, almost as if anticipating his needs. This cooperation between man and wild creature defied everything James had been taught about predator behavior. The most severe injuries required more than just cleaning and antibiotic treatment. Several deep gashes needed stitches to promote proper healing. James had assisted Sarah with sutures many times, but never on a wild animal of this size. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared the materials, remembering Sarah's steady technique and calm approach to even the most challenging cases. "This part's going to be a bit uncomfortable, big fellow, but we need to close these up properly." The bear's only response was a slow blink, but James took it as permission to proceed. The first stitch was the hardest, pushing the needle through thick skin while anticipating possible reaction. But the bear remained still, only a slight tensing of muscles indicating its awareness of the procedure. Time seemed to flow differently. In the barn's quiet interior as James worked, the usual morning sounds of the farm, roosters crowing, cattle lowing, the distant rumble of tractors from neighboring properties, created a peaceful backdrop to this extraordinary medical intervention. Each completed stitch brought visible relief to the injured animal, its massive body gradually relaxing as pain and tension eased. Scout occasionally approached to check on their progress, her presence adding another layer of surreal normalcy to the scene. The Border Collie's acceptance of this unusual patient seemed to validate James's instinctive decision to help. In her world of black and white herding logic, the bear had somehow been classified as something to protect rather than fear. As James completed the last suture, he noticed tears running down his cheeks. They weren't tears of fear or stress, but of something deeper, a profound connection to the trust this wild creature had placed in him. The bear's journey from feared predator to patient had opened something in his heart, reminding him of the incredible capacity for understanding between species that Sarah had always championed. The final step was bandaging the treated areas, a challenge that required all of James's ingenuity. Traditional veterinary wrappings weren't designed for an animal of this size and shape. He found himself creating improvised solutions, using materials from Sarah's kit in ways she probably never imagined. The bear's continued cooperation made the task possible, its massive body adjusting slightly to allow access to different areas. Throughout the procedure, James maintained a steady stream of gentle conversation, sharing thoughts and memories with his unusual patient. He told the bear about Sarah, about her love for all creatures, and her belief in the healing power of kindness. He spoke of his own journey from traditional farmer to someone who saw the land and its inhabitants as part of an interconnected whole. The morning had stretched into early afternoon by the time James stepped back to evaluate his work. The bear's wounds were cleaned, stitched and bandaged, but the animal would need time to recover its strength. The old dairy barn, with its solid walls and peaceful atmosphere, would serve as a rehabilitation space until the bear was strong enough to return to the wild. Looking into the bear's eyes one final time, before preparing to leave it to rest, James saw something that caught his breath. The fear and pain had been replaced by a calm awareness, an almost human-like acknowledgement of the care it had received. In that moment, the boundary between wild and domestic, between fearsome predator and grateful patient, seemed to dissolve completely. The experience had transformed something in James as well, his connection to the land and its creatures. Always strong had deepened in ways he couldn't fully express. Sarah would have understood. She'd always seen past the surface differences to the heart of things, recognizing the potential for healing and connection in the most unlikely places. As he gathered his supplies and prepared to attend to his neglected farm duties, James felt a profound sense of purpose. This unexpected encounter had reminded him that sometimes the most meaningful acts of kindness come disguised as challenges, testing our courage and compassion in ways we never anticipated. The bear's trust had given him a gift far greater than the care he had provided. It had renewed his faith in the deep connections possible between all living beings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barnyard as James hurried to complete his delayed farm chores. His mind kept returning to the extraordinary patient resting in the old dairy barn, even as his hands moved through the familiar routines of feeding livestock and checking irrigation lines. Each task seemed to carry new meaning after the morning's events, highlighting the delicate balance between the domestic and wild aspects of farm life. Inside the chicken coop, as he collected the day's eggs, James found himself sharing the story with his curious hens. "You should have seen it, ladies," he murmured, reaching beneath a particularly protective Rhode Island red. "A black bear, bigger than anything you've ever seen, letting me treat its wounds like it was one of Sarah's house cats." The chickens clucked softly, perhaps sensing the wonder in their caretaker's voice. The farm's rhythm had shifted to accommodate its unusual guest. James found himself creating new patterns, adjusting his routines to include regular checks on the bear while maintaining the essential tasks that kept the farm running. Each visit to the dairy barn revealed new aspects of the bear's personality, challenging his preconceptions about wild animals. During one afternoon check, James discovered the bear had managed to sit up, its massive form more alert, but still clearly weakened. The animal's eyes tracked him with an intelligence that seemed to transcend species barriers. James noticed that Scout had taken to lying near the barn entrance, maintaining a protective vigil that spoke volumes about the border collie's acceptance of this strange addition to her charges. Word of James's unusual patient began to spread through the farming community. Tom Reynolds, his nearest neighbor, was the first to stop by, more out of concern than curiosity. "Have you lost your mind, Mitchell?" Tom demanded, staying well away from the dairy barn. "That thing could kill you the moment it gets its strength back." But James saw an opportunity to share a deeper truth. He invited Tom to witness one of his checkups on the bear, maintaining a safe distance, but allowing his neighbor to observe the extraordinary interaction. Tom's skepticism gradually gave way to amazement as he watched the huge predator respond to James's gentle approach with unexpected docility. "I've never seen anything like it," Tom admitted afterward, his weathered face thoughtful. "Reminds me of something my grandfather used to say about there being more to animals than we give them credit for." The conversation that followed opened new perspectives for both men, bridging the gap between traditional farming views and a more nuanced understanding of wildlife. Other visitors followed, drawn by the spreading story of the farmer and the bear. Each encounter became an opportunity to challenge prevailing attitudes about wildlife. James found himself sharing Sarah's philosophy about the interconnectedness of all living things, his words carrying new weight because of his extraordinary patient. The local veterinarian, Dr. Peterson, initially expressed serious concerns about James's unauthorized treatment of a wild animal. However, upon examining the bear and James's careful documentation of the treatment process, her professional skepticism transformed into reluctant admiration. "You've done remarkably well," she acknowledged, reviewing the healing wounds. "Sarah would have been proud." Dr. Peterson's validation brought unexpected tears to James's eyes. "I felt her there with me," he admitted. "Every step of the way, it was like she was guiding my hands." The vet's presence also provided official documentation of the bear's condition, helping to legitimize James's unorthodox rescue effort in the eyes of local wildlife authorities. As news of the situation spread, James began receiving calls from wildlife rehabilitation centers across the state. Their interest wasn't just in the bear's physical recovery, but in the unusual bond that had developed between farmer and wild animal. Several experts noted that such successful treatment of an adult bear without professional facilities was unprecedented. The bear's recovery progressed steadily, each day bringing new signs of returning strength. James observed subtle changes in its behavior, the way it would adjust position to make bandage changes easier, its gentle acceptance of medication, the soft chuffing sounds it made in greeting when he entered the barn. These moments reinforced his belief in animals' capacity for understanding and cooperation. One particularly moving incident occurred during a severe thunderstorm that rattled the old barn's timbers. James had hurried to check on his patient, finding the bear visibly distressed by the loud thunder. Without thinking, he had sat down nearby, talking softly about his own experiences waiting out storms with Sarah. The bear's gradual relaxation, its massive head eventually resting on its paws as it listened to his voice, created a moment of connection that transcended traditional boundaries between man and wild creature. The experience began changing how James approached all aspects of his farming. He found himself moving more mindfully through his daily tasks, more aware of the wild creatures that shared his land. The hawk that hunted mice in his fields, the family of foxes that lived near the old stone wall, all became part of a larger story of coexistence rather than conflict. Local schools began requesting visits, seeing an opportunity for students to learn about wildlife conservation and compassion. James carefully managed these encounters, ensuring the bear wasn't stressed while using the situation to inspire young minds. He shared stories about Sarah's work with animals, about the importance of understanding and respecting wildlife, and about the unexpected ways that kindness could bridge seemingly impossible gaps. One young girl's question particularly struck him. "Weren't you scared?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. James considered his answer carefully, wanting to convey an important truth. "Being scared is natural," he explained, "but sometimes helping others means finding courage we didn't know we had. The bear needed help more than I needed to be afraid." The dairy barn became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand this unusual story. James found himself hosting wildlife photographers, documentary filmmakers, and nature writers, each drawn by the tale of trust between farmer and bear. Their presence helped spread a message of conservation and compassion far beyond the boundaries of Cedar Grove Farm. As autumn deepened, the bear's physical recovery was matched by a growing restlessness that James recognized. The call of the wild was becoming stronger as health and strength returned. The time for difficult decisions was approaching, decisions about when and how to release his unusual patient back into the wilderness. Dr. Peterson helped develop a release plan that would give the bear the best chance of survival. They would need to time it carefully, ensuring the animal had enough strength and that suitable territory was available. The process would require coordination with wildlife authorities and careful consideration of the bear's natural habits. James found himself facing complex emotions as he prepared for the bear's eventual departure. The bond they had developed challenged traditional notions about relationships between humans and wild animals. Yet he knew that true compassion meant honoring the bear's wild nature, even if that meant letting go. The experience had transformed Cedar Grove Farm into something more than just a working farm. It had become a symbol of the possible harmony between agricultural life and wildlife, between human compassion and wild nature. James discovered that his story was inspiring others to reconsider their relationships with the wild creatures sharing their land. As he watched the bear's growing strength and vitality, James reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. What had begun as a moment of crisis had evolved into a profound lesson about courage, trust, and the unexpected ways that kindness could transform both giver and receiver. The bear's presence had awakened something in the community, challenging old fears and prejudices, while opening hearts to new possibilities. Every evening, as James completed his final barn check, he would spend a few moments with his unusual patient, sharing the quiet end of the day. These peaceful interludes became a time for reflection, for appreciating the mysterious ways that life could bring together the most unlikely companions in moments of need. The story of the farmer and the bear was becoming something larger than just a tale of animal rescue. It was evolving into a testament to the power of compassion, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from confronting danger, but from choosing to help despite the risks. As James prepared for the next phase of their journey, he understood that this experience would continue to shape his life long after the bear returned to its wild home. The changing seasons painted Cedar Grove Farm in vibrant autumn colors, as James faced the bittersweet reality of preparing for his unusual patient's release. The bear's recovery had progressed remarkably, its wounds healing cleanly under his careful attention. Each day brought new signs that the time for returning to the wild was approaching. The restless pacing, the longing looks toward the forest, the growing strength in its powerful limbs. Working with Dr. Peterson and wildlife authorities, James had identified the perfect release location, a remote area of protected forest 30 miles north of the farm. The territory was rich in natural food sources and far enough from human settlements to give the bear the best chance of successful reintegration into the wild. The timing was crucial. They needed to ensure the bear had enough time to establish a territory before winter. One crisp October morning, as James performed his daily check on the bear, a remarkable incident occurred that touched his heart deeply. As he entered the barn, he found the bear had arranged fallen apples from his orchard in a neat pile near its resting area. The sight stopped him in his tracks. This wasn't random animal behavior, but a deliberate act that spoke of intelligence and awareness he hadn't expected. "Well, look at you, being all organized," James chuckled, his voice thick with emotion. The bear's response was equally surprising. It pushed one of the apples toward him with its nose, a gesture that seemed almost like sharing. This simple act crystallized the extraordinary relationship that had developed between them, challenging everything James thought he knew about wild animals. The local community continued to be transformed by the bear's presence. Farmers who had once viewed wildlife as nothing but a nuisance began sharing stories of their own unexpected encounters with wild creatures. Tom Reynolds, once the biggest skeptic, had started implementing wildlife corridors on his own property, inspired by the change he'd witnessed in his neighbor. Young Amy Thompson, the 12-year-old daughter of a nearby dairy farmer, had been particularly moved by the bear's story. She started a wildlife appreciation club at her school, using James's experience as a foundation for teaching other children about compassion toward all creatures. Her initiative sparked a wave of similar projects across local schools, creating a ripple effect of environmental awareness. The preparation for release became a community effort. Local craftsmen helped James design and build a special transport enclosure that would ensure the bear's safety and comfort during the journey to its new territory. The high school's environmental science class used the project as a case study in wildlife rehabilitation and ecosystem management. Dr. Peterson's regular visits now included detailed documentation of the bear's recovery, creating a valuable resource for future wildlife rehabilitation efforts. "What you've achieved here," she told James one afternoon, "goes beyond just saving one animal. You're changing how people think about wildlife conservation at a grassroots level. James found himself becoming an unexpected advocate for wildlife conservation. His story began appearing in local and then national media, drawing attention to the importance of maintaining harmony between agricultural communities and wildlife. Speaking engagements at environmental conferences allowed him to share Sarah's vision of compassionate farming with a wider audience. The bear's increasing restlessness brought both joy and concern. While James celebrated each sign of returning strength, he worried about the challenges his patient would face upon returning to the wild. The protective instincts he developed during their time together made it difficult to contemplate the dangers that awaited in the forest. Scout seemed to sense the approaching changes, spending more time near the barn and showing an almost maternal concern for the bear. The border collie's acceptance of this unusual addition to her farm family had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire experience. Her behavior challenged conventional wisdom about natural enemies and instinctive fears. One misty morning, as James approached the barn for his daily check, he found the bear standing at its full height, pressing against the barn door. The sight was both magnificent and intimidating, a powerful reminder that despite their bond, this was a wild creature meant for freedom. The bear's eyes met his with an intelligence that seemed to communicate its readiness for the next chapter. The day of release was set for the following week, chosen to coincide with a period of mild weather and abundant natural food sources. Wildlife authorities had thoroughly scouted the release site, ensuring it offered the optimal combination of shelter, food, and distance from human activity. As James began the final preparations, memories of the past weeks flooded his mind. He remembered the fear and uncertainty of that first morning, the countless hours spent tending wounds and building trust, the gradual transformation of both patient and caregiver. Each moment had contributed to a deeper understanding of the connection possible between humans and wild creatures. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the upcoming release, capturing the community's investment in the bear's journey. The article included interviews with various community members who had been touched by the experience. Their perspectives revealed how deeply the story had resonated, challenging preconceptions and inspiring new ways of thinking about wildlife. Sarah's presence seemed especially strong during these final days. James found himself talking to her as he worked, sharing his hopes and fears about the bear's future. "You would have loved this," he whispered one evening, watching the bear sleep peacefully in its corner of the barn. "You always said animals had more to teach us than we realized." The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sent specialists to assist with the release, bringing their expertise in transitioning captive treated animals back to the wild. They were impressed by the bear's condition and the obvious bond it had formed with James. "This is unprecedented," one expert admitted. "The level of trust and cooperation you've achieved without professional facilities is remarkable." As the release day approached, James spent extra time with his unusual patient, knowing their time together was drawing to a close. He spoke softly about the journey ahead, about the beautiful forest that would become its new home, about the importance of maintaining its wild instincts despite their connection. The bear seemed to understand the significance of these moments, remaining unusually still and attentive during their interactions. Its eyes, once clouded with pain and fear, now shone with health and something that looked remarkably like wisdom. The transformation went far beyond physical healing. There was a dignity and presence to the animal that commanded respect. Inside the barn, James completed the final health assessment with Dr. Peterson's assistance. The bear's wounds had healed beautifully, leaving only faint scars beneath its thick fur. Its weight had returned to healthy levels, and all signs pointed to a successful recovery. The physical rehabilitation was complete, but the emotional impact of their time together would last forever. The community's support continued to pour in during these final days. Local farmers contributed to creating food caches near the release site, ensuring the bear would have reliable sources of nutrition as it readjusted to independence. Children from the elementary school created artwork celebrating the bear's journey, their colorful drawings decorating the walls of James's farmhouse. As James made his final preparations, he reflected on how this unexpected encounter had changed not just his life, but the entire community's relationship with wildlife. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had grown into a movement, inspiring others to see the possibility of harmony between human activities and wild nature. The eve of the release brought a sense of both accomplishment and melancholy. James spent extra time in the barn, sharing one last quiet evening with his extraordinary patient. The bear's presence had transformed this simple agricultural building into a place of healing and connection, a symbol of the unexpected ways that compassion could bridge the gap between wild and domestic worlds. Scout lay nearby, her steady presence a reminder of how this experience had challenged and changed everyone it touched. The border collie's acceptance of the bear had been one of the first signs that something extraordinary was possible, and her unwavering support had helped make the entire rehabilitation possible. As darkness fell, James sat in the peaceful barn, listening to the bear's steady breathing and the familiar sounds of his farm settling into night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and emotions, but for now he savored these final moments of an extraordinary journey that had taught him more about courage, trust, and connection than he ever expected to learn. Dawn broke over Cedar Grove Farm in a spectacular display of pink and gold, as if nature itself was celebrating the significance of the day. James had barely slept, his mind filled with thoughts of the journey ahead. The release site was a carefully chosen location in the heart of the Green Mountain National Forest, where the bear would have the best chance at reclaiming its wild existence. The special transport enclosure stood ready beside the barn, a masterpiece of local craftsmanship designed to ensure both safety and comfort during the journey. Local wildlife experts had arrived early, their vehicles parked discreetly at a distance to minimize stress on the animal. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and a touch of solemnity, as everyone present understood they were participating in something extraordinary. Dr. Peterson arrived just as the morning mist was lifting, carrying her medical kit for one final check before transport. She found James in the barn, sitting quietly with his unusual patient. The bear was alert but calm, seeming to sense the importance of the day. The veterinarian's examination confirmed what they already knew. The bear was ready for this transition, physically strong and mentally prepared for return to its natural habitat. The most challenging moment came when it was time to guide the bear into the transport enclosure. James had spent several days familiarizing the animal with the structure, but the actual transfer would test the trust they had built. Using gentle words and calm movements, he began the delicate process of encouraging the bear to enter the enclosure. "It's time, my friend," James spoke softly, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "You've got a whole forest waiting for you." The bear's response was remarkable. It moved with deliberate care, following James's guidance, as if understanding the purpose behind this new development. Scout watched from her position near the barn door, her tail slowly wagging in what seemed like encouragement. The loading process became a powerful demonstration of the bond between man and animal. The bear, despite its natural instincts and impressive size, moved with surprising gentleness, responding to James's voice and presence with extraordinary trust. Wildlife experts observed in amazement, taking notes on this unprecedented cooperation between a wild predator and a human caregiver. As the transport vehicle began its journey, James followed in his truck, unwilling to let his patient travel alone. The convoy moved carefully through the Vermont countryside, passing farms and forests that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Each mile brought them closer to the moment of release, and James found himself sharing stories with Dr. Peterson about the remarkable weeks of rehabilitation. The release site was a remote clearing surrounded by mature forest, chosen for its rich natural resources and distance from human settlements. As they arrived, the morning had grown into a perfect autumn day, with sunlight filtering through golden leaves and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. The location seemed to welcome them, offering the promise of a new beginning. Local wildlife officials had prepared the area, ensuring everything was in place for a successful transition. They had created several food caches in the surrounding forest, providing backup resources as the bear relearned its foraging skills. The preparation was thorough, but everyone knew that ultimately the animal's survival would depend on its ability to reclaim its wild instincts. The moment of release required careful orchestration. The transport enclosure was positioned at the edge of the clearing, its door facing the dense forest beyond. James approached for one final interaction, knowing these would be their last moments together. The bear's eyes met his with that same remarkable intelligence he had come to know so well, and in them he saw both gratitude and readiness. "You've taught me more than I ever expected to learn," James spoke quietly. His words meant only for the bear. About trust, about courage, about the connections possible between all living things. The bear responded with a soft chuff, a sound that had become familiar during their time together. It was as if the animal was offering its own farewell, acknowledging the bond they had shared. The release itself happened with unexpected grace. As the enclosure door was opened, the bear emerged slowly, its powerful form moving with deliberate awareness. It paused at the threshold between captivity and freedom, taking in its new surroundings with alert senses. Then, in a moment that brought tears to many eyes, it turned back to look at James one final time. That last look contained volumes, recognition, gratitude, and something that seemed remarkably like wisdom. Then, with confident steps, the bear moved into the forest, its dark form gradually disappearing among the trees. The transition from patient to wild creature was complete, marked by a dignity that left all present in thoughtful silence. As they watched the bear disappear, Dr. Peterson placed a hand on James's shoulder. "Sarah would be so proud," she said softly. "This wasn't just about saving one animal. You've shown people what's possible when we choose compassion over fear." The words touched something deep in James's heart, bringing both tears and a sense of completion. the impact of their extraordinary journey continued to ripple outward. The local community's perspective on wildlife had been permanently altered, with many farmers implementing new practices to coexist more harmoniously with wild creatures. The story of the farmer and the bear became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to reconsider their relationship with the natural world. Young Amy Thompson's Wildlife Appreciation Club had grown into a regional movement, with students from multiple schools participating in conservation projects. She often cited James's experience as proof that unexpected connections were possible, that fear could be transformed into understanding through acts of kindness. The dairy barn, now empty of its unusual resident, retained a special atmosphere. James found himself spending quiet moments there, reflecting on the lessons learned during those remarkable weeks. The space had become more than just a structure. It was a testament to the extraordinary possibilities that arise when someone chooses to act with courage and compassion. Scout seemed to miss the bear's presence, occasionally visiting the barn and lying in her old watchful spot. Her acceptance of the wild creature had been one of the first signs that something miraculous was possible, and her behavior continued to remind James of the unexpected ways that boundaries could be crossed. Through trust and kindness, the forest where the bear was released became a symbol of hope for the community. While respecting the animal's need for space and privacy, local conservationists monitored the area discreetly, documenting signs of successful reintegration. Each confirmation of the bear's adaptation to wildlife brought joy to those who had been part of its journey. James found himself forever changed by the experience. His approach to farming evolved to incorporate a deeper awareness of the wildlife sharing his land. The bear's story became part of his daily interactions with visitors, inspiring others to see the possibility of harmony between agricultural life and wild nature. As autumn deepened into winter, James often thought about his unusual patient, imagining it preparing for hibernation in its new territory. The experience had left him with a profound understanding of the connections possible between all living things and the transformative power of choosing compassion over fear. The legacy of their time together continued to grow, touching lives far beyond the boundaries of Cedar Grove Farm. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had evolved into a testimony to the extraordinary possibilities that arise when someone dares to challenge conventional boundaries and listen to their heart's deepest wisdom. In the end, the story of the farmer and the bear became more than just a tale of animal rescue. It became a beacon of hope, reminding people that in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, acts of compassion could build bridges between the most unlikely of companions, creating moments of grace that continue to inspire long after they end. The winter months passed slowly at Cedar Grove Farm, each day bringing new reflections on the extraordinary events of the autumn. James found himself settling into a different rhythm, one that incorporated a deeper awareness of the wild creatures sharing his land. The empty dairy barn had become a place of contemplation, its quiet spaces holding memories of an unexpected friendship that had changed not just his life, but an entire community's perspective on wildlife. One snowy February morning, James discovered fresh bear tracks crossing his property. Though larger than his former patients, these prints sparked a wave of memories and led him to follow their trail to the edge of his land. The tracks told a story of confident movement, of a healthy animal going about its natural business without fear or aggression. This simple evidence of wildlife continuing its ancient patterns brought a smile to his face. The impact of his experience continued to ripple through the farming community in unexpected ways. Tom Reynolds, once the most skeptical of neighbors, had become an unlikely champion for wildlife conservation. He'd transformed a portion of his unused pasture into a natural corridor, complete with native plants and water sources that attracted diverse wildlife. "Never thought I'd say this," Tom admitted one day, "but watching these creatures go about their business gives me a whole new appreciation for the land." Sarah's veterinary kit remained in its place of honor in the barn, but it was no longer just a memorial. James had begun offering basic first aid workshops for local farmers, teaching them how to safely help injured wildlife when professional help wasn't immediately available. Dr. Peterson supported these efforts, providing expert guidance and helping to establish protocols that balance compassion with safety. The story of the farmer and the bear had spread far beyond their rural community. Environmental organizations reached out to James, seeking his insight on bridging the gap between agricultural interests and wildlife conservation. His straightforward approach and practical experience brought a fresh perspective to these discussions, helping to create solutions that worked for both farmers and wild creatures. Young Amy Thompson's Wildlife Appreciation Club had evolved into a formal program adopted by schools across the state. Students learned about local ecosystems, participated in conservation projects, and developed a deeper understanding of their role in protecting natural habitats. Amy often invited James to speak to her classes, where his story inspired young minds to see the possibility of harmony between human activities and wild nature. One particularly moving development came in the form of an art exhibition at the local library. Community members contributed paintings, photographs, and sculptures inspired by the bear's story. The diverse interpretations reflected how deeply the experience had touched people's hearts, each piece capturing a different aspect of the journey from fear to understanding. Scout's behavior had evolved as well. The border collie maintained her protective instincts, but showed remarkable discretion when encountering wildlife on the farm. She would alert James to the presence of wild visitors, but remain calm and non-threatening, as if remembering the lessons learned during their time with the bear. Her example influenced other farm dogs in the area, leading to fewer conflicts between domestic and wild animals. Spring's arrival brought new life to Cedar Grove Farm, along with unexpected validation of James's efforts. Wildlife officials conducting their annual survey reported increased biodiversity in the area, attributing it partly to the changed attitudes and practices of local farmers. The harmonious coexistence demonstrated through the bear's story had inspired others to see their land as part of a larger ecological community. James found himself becoming an informal consultant for other farmers facing wildlife challenges. His experience had given him unique insights into finding balanced solutions that respected both agricultural needs and natural habitats. Each success story added to the growing evidence that compassion and understanding could transform seemingly insurmountable conflicts into opportunities for cooperation. The dairy barn had taken on a new role as well. While still a working farm building, it had become something of a sanctuary, a place where people came to share their own stories of unexpected encounters with wildlife. James welcomed these visitors, understanding that each conversation contributed to a larger dialogue about human-wildlife relationships. A documentary filmmaker spent several weeks at Cedar Grove Farm, capturing the lasting impact of the bear's story on the community. Through interviews with James, his neighbors, and local wildlife experts, a powerful narrative emerged about the transformative power of choosing compassion over fear. The resulting film would go on to inspire similar initiatives in farming communities across the country. Dr. Peterson's regular visits became opportunities for deeper discussions about the intersection of veterinary medicine and wildlife conservation. She and James worked together to develop guidelines for farmers dealing with injured wildlife, emphasizing the importance of professional involvement while acknowledging the reality that immediate action could sometimes mean the difference between life and death. The release site in the Green Mountain National Forest had become a symbol of successful wildlife rehabilitation. Regular monitoring showed a thriving ecosystem, with the bear's presence contributing to the natural balance of the area. Though James never sought direct contact with his former patient, knowing the animal had successfully readapted to wildlife brought him profound satisfaction. Local indigenous elders reached out to James, sharing traditional perspectives on human-wildlife relationships that resonated deeply with his experience. Their ancient wisdom about the interconnectedness of all living things provided a philosophical framework for understanding the extraordinary bond he had shared with the bear. These conversations added new dimensions to his understanding of his role as a steward of the land. As spring progressed, James noticed subtle changes in how he approached his daily farming tasks. Every decision now carried an awareness of its impact on the wild creatures sharing his land, from timing his hay cutting to protect ground nesting, birds to maintaining brush piles for small mammals. Each action reflected a deeper understanding of ecological relationships. The community's annual agricultural fair took on new meaning, with a special emphasis on wildlife conservation alongside traditional farming exhibitions. James's story became a centerpiece, demonstrating how agricultural success and wildlife protection could support rather than oppose each other. The event drew visitors from across the state, eager to learn from this example of rural transformation. Scout's puppies, born that spring, seemed to inherit their mother's balanced approach to wildlife. James watched with amazement as the young dogs learned to distinguish between threats and natural neighbors, showing an intuitive understanding that reflected their mother's evolved perspective. Their behavior offered hope for future generations of farm dogs. The bear's story continued to evolve, taking on almost mythical qualities in the telling and retelling. Yet James remained grounded in the reality of his experience, understanding that its true power lay not in the extraordinary nature of the events, but in the very ordinary choice to act with compassion in the face of fear. As summer approached, bringing new life and activity to the farm, James reflected on the ongoing impact of his autumn adventure. The experience had sparked a quiet revolution in his community, transforming relationships not just between humans and wildlife, but between neighbors who had found common ground in their shared stewardship of the land. The legacy of those remarkable weeks continued to grow, touching lives far beyond the boundaries of Cedar Grove Farm. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had evolved into a testament to the extraordinary possibilities that arise when someone dares to challenge conventional boundaries and listen to their heart's deepest wisdom. 1 year after the bear's release, Cedar Grove Farm hosted a remarkable gathering that brought together farmers, conservationists, and wildlife experts from across the country. The occasion marked not just the anniversary of an extraordinary rescue, but the celebration of a transformed community that had discovered a new way of living in harmony with nature. James stood at the edge of his apple orchard, watching as visitors explored the educational displays set up across his property. The old dairy barn, now converted into a wildlife education center, drew particular interest. Inside, photographs and artifacts told the story of the injured bear, but more importantly, they showcased the countless wildlife initiatives that had sprung from that single act of compassion. A special moment came when Amy Thompson unveiled her latest project, a comprehensive wildlife tracking program that connected students with local farmers to monitor and protect animal habitats. The young conservationist had grown in confidence and knowledge, her initial club evolving into a sophisticated citizen science initiative that was gaining national attention. Dr. Peterson presented research findings that documented the remarkable changes in local wildlife populations since the community had adopted more conservation-minded farming practices. Species that had once been rare sightings were now regular visitors to farms that had implemented wildlife corridors and natural habitat zones. The data proved that compassionate farming didn't just benefit wild creatures. It created healthier, more resilient agricultural ecosystems. The most touching presentation came from Tom Reynolds, who shared how his initial skepticism had transformed into deep commitment. He had documented his farm's 2-year journey from traditional operations to wildlife-friendly practices, showing how simple changes had created dramatic improvements in both wildlife diversity and crop yields. His testimony carried special weight among farmers who were still uncertain about embracing change. Scout's presence at the gathering drew particular attention as she demonstrated the evolved relationship between farm dogs and wildlife. Her careful interactions with wild visitors had become legendary in the community, and trainers from across the country came to observe and learn from her example. Her puppies, now grown, showed the same remarkable discretion, suggesting that this new approach to wildlife could be passed down through generations. The indigenous elders who had shared their wisdom with James conducted a special ceremony, blessing the land and acknowledging the sacred bonds between humans and wildlife. Their prayers and songs filled the air with ancient wisdom, reminding everyone present that the harmony they were creating was a return to age-old understanding rather than a new invention. As evening approached, James led a walk to the forest edge, where trail cameras had captured extraordinary footage of local wildlife, including several bears, using the natural corridors that now connected various properties. The images showed healthy animals moving confidently through their territory, neither avoiding nor confronting human spaces, but coexisting in natural balance. The documentary filmmaker who had chronicled the community's transformation premiered a new short film capturing the year's developments. The footage showed how individual acts of compassion had created a ripple effect, transforming not just one farm or one community, but inspiring similar changes across the region. Viewers watched in amazed silence as the story of their collective journey unfolded on screen. A surprise appearance by wildlife officials brought news that would touch James deeply. They had documented evidence suggesting his former patient had not only survived, but thrived in its new territory. Trail camera footage showed a healthy, adult bear with distinctive scarring that matched his rescued friend, now leading a natural life in the forest. The officials credited the successful rehabilitation with changing their approach to wildlife management. Local artists had created installations throughout the farm, interpreting the theme of harmony between domestic and wild spaces. These works captured the imagination of visitors, helping them visualize the delicate balance between human needs and wildlife conservation. One particularly moving piece incorporated actual items from the bear's rehabilitation, transformed into a sculpture, celebrating the power of compassion. As night fell, the gathering moved to the illuminated barn for a community dinner that celebrated both farming traditions and wildlife conservation. The meal featured locally grown produce from wildlife-friendly farms, while speakers shared stories of their own journeys toward more compassionate land stewardship. The atmosphere was charged with hope and possibility. James found himself surrounded by a community that had been fundamentally changed by their shared experience. Farmers who had once seen wildlife as adversaries now spoke proudly of the wild, creatures living on their land. Children who might have grown up fearing wild animals were developing deep appreciation and understanding of natural systems. The education center in the old dairy barn had become a model for similar facilities across the country. Its innovative programs combined practical farming knowledge with wildlife conservation, helping new generations understand the delicate balance required for true environmental stewardship. The center's success proved that rural communities could lead the way in wildlife conservation. Sarah's presence seemed especially strong during the gathering. James felt her approval in every successful initiative, every transformed perspective, every small victory for wildlife conservation. Her vision of compassionate farming had taken root and flourished beyond anything he could have imagined. Late in the evening, as the celebration continued, James slipped away to his favorite spot near the stone wall where he had first found the injured bear. The night was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures going about their business, unafraid of human presence, yet maintaining their wild nature. This, he realized, was the true success of their effort, not eliminating boundaries between wild and domestic, but learning to honor and respect them. The legacy of those extraordinary autumn weeks had grown far beyond a simple story of rescue and rehabilitation. It had become a testament to the power of choosing compassion over fear, of seeing beyond traditional boundaries to recognize the deep connections between all living things. The transformed community stood as proof that small acts of kindness could spark profound changes. As James watched the stars emerge above his beloved farm, he reflected on how a single choice, to help rather than turn away, had set in motion changes that continued to ripple outward. The story of the farmer and the bear had become more than just a tale of wildlife rescue. It had become a beacon of hope for communities everywhere, showing that harmony between humans and wildlife was not just possible but essential for the health of both. Scout appeared silently beside him, her presence a reminder of the unexpected partnerships that had made everything possible. Together, they listened to the night sounds of their shared land, each creature's voice contributing to the symphony of life that made Cedar Grove Farm not just a place of agriculture, but a testament to the power of compassion to transform the world. The gathering had demonstrated that their experience was not just a singular event, but the beginning of a movement. As James headed back to join his guests, he carried with him the deep satisfaction of knowing that the choice he had made one autumn morning had helped create a future where humans and wildlife could thrive together in respectful coexistence. You're absolutely right. I should continue with part 9 of our 12-part story without interruption. As winter settled over Cedar Grove Farm once again, an unexpected letter arrived that would add another remarkable chapter to the story. The envelope bore the official seal of the National Wildlife Conservation Society, and inside, James found an invitation that would take his message of compassion and conservation to an international stage. The society had chosen James's experience as the centerpiece for an upcoming global symposium on human-wildlife cooperation. Representatives from farming communities worldwide would gather to learn how one small Vermont farm had sparked a revolution in wildlife conservation. The invitation wasn't just to attend. They wanted James to be the keynote speaker. The prospect of addressing an international audience initially filled James with trepidation. He was a farmer, not a public speaker. But as he shared his concerns with Dr. Peterson during one of her regular visits, she reminded him of another time he'd faced his fears for a greater purpose. "Remember that morning with the bear," she said. "Sometimes the most important things we do are the ones that scare us the most." Scout seemed to sense her master's unease, staying closer than usual as James began preparing for the symposium. Her steady presence reminded him of the extraordinary partnership they'd shared during the bear's rehabilitation. If a border collie could overcome her instinctive reactions to form an unlikely friendship with a wild bear, surely he could find the courage to share their story with the world. The preparation process unveiled new insights as James worked with Amy Thompson to organize his presentation. The young conservationist's fresh perspective helped him see how the individual elements of their community's transformation could serve as a blueprint for others. Together, they developed a practical framework that other farming communities could adapt to their own circumstances. Tom Reynolds insisted on accompanying James to the symposium, wanting to add his voice to the testimony of change. The former skeptic had become one of the most eloquent advocates for wildlife-friendly farming, his transformation lending credibility to the message that change was possible even for the most traditional farmers. The indigenous elders who had shared their wisdom with the community offered James a special blessing before his journey. They performed a ceremony that connected his modern experience with ancient traditions of human-wildlife cooperation, reminding him that he was helping to restore something that had been lost rather than creating something entirely new. As James prepared for his departure, the community rallied to create a comprehensive documentation of their journey. Farmers contributed records of wildlife sightings and crop yields, demonstrating how conservation practices had improved both natural diversity and agricultural productivity. Local artists created visual representations of the changes, capturing the spirit of transformation in powerful images. The symposium itself exceeded all expectations. Farmers from 6 continents gathered to hear how a single act of compassion had sparked a revolution in rural conservation. James's straightforward storytelling resonated deeply with the audience, particularly when he shared the practical details of how their community had overcome initial fears and skepticism. During the conference, James encountered others who had experienced similar moments of connection with wild creatures. A shepherd from the Scottish Highlands shared her story of protecting wolves rather than hunting them, discovering that healthy predator populations actually improved her flock's health by controlling disease-carrying rodents. A rice farmer from Thailand described how preserving habitat for wild elephants had enhanced his soil quality and water management. These stories reinforced what James had always believed, that compassion for wildlife wasn't just morally right, it was practically beneficial. The symposium became a platform for sharing these experiences, allowing farmers from different cultures and contexts to learn from each other's successes and challenges. The most powerful moment came when satellite footage revealed how the changes implemented around Cedar Grove Farm had created a ripple effect visible from space. The wildlife corridors and preserved habitats formed a green network spreading outward from the original farm, demonstrating how individual actions could transform entire landscapes. James's presentation included video updates on the local wildlife, including recent footage of what experts believed to be his former patient. The bear had become something of a symbol for successful rehabilitation, its story inspiring wildlife centers around the world to reconsider their approach to treating and releasing injured animals. The international media coverage of the symposium brought the story to an even wider audience. Journalists were particularly drawn to the practical aspects of the Cedar Grove Farm model, how small changes in farming practices could create significant benefits for both agricultural productivity and wildlife conservation. The gathering also provided an opportunity to address the challenges and setbacks they'd encountered along the way. James spoke honestly about the initial fears, the mistakes made, and the lessons learned. This transparency added credibility to their success story, showing others that transformation was possible even in the face of obstacles. As the symposium drew to a close, participating communities began forming an international network dedicated to wildlife-friendly farming practices. Cedar Grove Farm would serve as a model and training center, hosting farmers from around the world who wanted to learn firsthand about implementing similar changes in their own regions. The experience left James with a deeper understanding of how far their story had reached and how much potential it still held for creating positive change. What had begun as a simple act of compassion toward one injured animal had grown into a global movement, proving that individual choices could, indeed, transform the world. Returning home to Vermont, James found himself viewing Cedar Grove Farm with fresh eyes. The practices that had once seemed revolutionary had become natural parts of daily life, demonstrating how completely transformation was possible when communities embraced change with open hearts and minds. The story of the farmer and the bear had taken on new dimensions, becoming part of a larger narrative about humanity's relationship with the natural world. It stood as proof that choosing compassion over fear could create ripples of positive change that extended far beyond the original act of kindness. The late spring sunrise painted Cedar Grove Farm in ethereal colors as James embarked on an unexpected new chapter. The farm had been selected for a groundbreaking study on the long-term effects of wildlife-friendly farming practices, bringing together scientists, conservationists, and agricultural experts from leading research institutions worldwide. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned wildlife biologist, had chosen the farm as the centerpiece of her research into what she called cooperative ecology, the study of how human activities could enhance rather than diminish natural ecosystems. Her team installed sophisticated monitoring equipment throughout the property, creating a living laboratory that would document every aspect of the farm's unique approach to conservation. The research revealed surprising patterns that even James hadn't noticed. The wildlife corridors he'd established had not only provided safe passage for larger animals, but had created microclimates that supported rare plant species. These plants, in turn, attracted specialized pollinators that improved crop yields in ways traditional farming methods couldn't match. Scout's puppies, now fully grown, demonstrated remarkable behaviors that caught the researchers' attention. The dogs had developed sophisticated communication patterns with wild animals, using body language and vocalizations that seemed to transcend species barriers. This unexpected development became the focus of a separate study on animal cognition and interspecies cooperation. The old dairy barn, transformed into an education center, now hosted a state-of-the-art research facility in its upper level. Here, scientists analyzed data while farmers and students observed their work, creating an unprecedented bridge between academic research and practical application. The space hummed with energy as people from different backgrounds shared insights and discovered new possibilities. James found himself learning alongside the researchers, his practical experience combining with their scientific knowledge to create deeper understanding. Each day brought new revelations about the intricate connections between farming practices and wildlife behavior. The bear's story had opened a door, but what lay beyond was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Amy Thompson, now pursuing environmental studies in college, returned to conduct her own research project. Her focus was on documenting the social changes in the farming community, how attitudes toward wildlife had evolved, and how these changes had affected everything from local policies to family relationships. Her work revealed that compassion for wildlife had strengthened human bonds as well. Tom Reynolds' farm became a secondary research site, offering valuable data on the transition from traditional to wildlife-friendly farming methods. His detailed records of the changes in soil health, crop yields, and wildlife populations provided crucial evidence that conservation practices could enhance rather than hinder agricultural productivity. The indigenous elders who had shared their wisdom with the community became regular contributors to the research project, offering traditional ecological knowledge that often preceded and validated scientific findings. Their understanding of natural cycles and interconnections added depth to the scientific observations, creating a more complete picture of ecosystem health. Dr. Peterson's veterinary practice had evolved to include a wildlife rehabilitation center where the lessons learned from the bear's recovery informed new treatment protocols. Her success rates with injured wildlife soared as she implemented the principles of trust-based rehabilitation that James had discovered through experience. The research project attracted international attention, with documentary crews from major networks arriving to capture the unprecedented cooperation between farmers, scientists, and wildlife. Their footage revealed beautiful moments of harmony: deer grazing peacefully near active farm equipment, predator species maintaining natural balance without threatening livestock, birds returning to nesting sites that had been abandoned for generations. James's approach to farm management had evolved into what researchers termed adaptive stewardship, a flexible system that responded to the needs of both agricultural production and wildlife conservation. This method required careful observation and constant adjustment, but the results spoke for themselves in improved soil health, reduced pest problems, and increased biodiversity. The presence of apex predators, including bears, had created what scientists called a trophic cascade of positive changes throughout the ecosystem. Their natural behavior patterns helped control deer populations, which in turn allowed native plant species to thrive, creating more robust and resilient natural systems that benefited both wildlife and farming. Local schools developed new curricula based on the research findings, teaching students about ecology through hands-on experience at Cedar Grove Farm. Children learned to read animal tracks, understand weather patterns, and recognize the signs of healthy ecosystems. Their enthusiasm spread to their families, creating another wave of positive change in the community. The research project's most significant discovery was the documentation of what Dr. Chen called cooperative resilience, the ability of human and natural systems to support and strengthen each other when allowed to interact harmoniously. This finding challenged the traditional view of farming and wildlife conservation as opposing forces. Farmers from across the country began visiting Cedar Grove Farm to learn about these research findings and their practical applications. Each visitor left with not just new knowledge, but a transformed perspective on the possibility of farming in partnership with nature rather than in opposition to it. The bear's story, which had catalyzed all these changes, gained new significance in light of the research. What had seemed like a singular event was now understood as a turning point in the relationship between human communities and wildlife, a practical demonstration of the potential for cooperation rather than conflict. International conservation organizations took notice of the research findings, leading to the development of new protocols for wildlife rehabilitation and release. The success of the bear's recovery had proven that treating injured wildlife with trust and compassion could lead to better outcomes than traditional methods focused solely on medical treatment. The research project also documented the economic benefits of wildlife-friendly farming practices. Reduced pest control costs, improved soil fertility, and enhanced crop resilience all contributed to better farm profitability. These findings helped convince skeptical farmers that conservation and successful agriculture could work hand in hand. One particularly moving aspect of the research involved tracking the emotional and psychological benefits of working in harmony with wildlife. Farmers reported reduced stress levels, increased job satisfaction, and a deeper sense of connection to their land. These findings suggested that compassionate farming practices could improve human well-being as well as environmental health. As the research project continued to yield new insights, James often found himself returning to the spot where he had first found the injured bear. Each visit reminded him that the greatest discoveries often begin with a simple choice to act with compassion, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. The story of Cedar Grove Farm had evolved from a tale of one farmer's kindness into a scientifically documented model for sustainable coexistence between human communities and wildlife. Yet, at its heart, it remained a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the endless possibilities that arise when people choose to see beyond traditional boundaries, to embrace new ways of living in harmony with the natural world. 3 years after the bear's rehabilitation, Cedar Grove Farm faced its greatest challenge yet. A severe drought threatened the region, testing the resilience of both agricultural practices and wildlife populations. Yet this crisis would reveal the most profound implications of James's compassionate approach to farming and conservation. As water sources dwindled across the state, wildlife began congregating around the farm's carefully maintained wetland areas and water conservation systems. What might have once been seen as competition for scarce resources instead demonstrated the wisdom of James's integrated approach to land management. The wildlife corridors and diverse habitats he'd established proved crucial for both wild creatures and agricultural sustainability. Dr. Chen's research team quickly mobilized to document this unprecedented natural experiment. Their monitoring systems captured extraordinary scenes of cooperation between species that would normally compete for resources. Bears, deer, and smaller mammals took turns at water sources, maintaining a natural rhythm that prevented conflict. The farm's adapted ecosystem showed remarkable resilience in the face of environmental stress. Scout's extended family of working dogs played an unexpected role during this challenging period. Their evolved understanding of wildlife behavior helped maintain peaceful boundaries between farm operations and wild animals seeking water and shelter. The dogs seemed to instinctively know when to guard and when to allow access, demonstrating a sophisticated grasp of ecosystem balance. The education center became a hub for emergency response planning, hosting meetings between farmers, wildlife experts, and local officials. James's experience proved invaluable as communities sought ways to protect both agricultural interests and wildlife populations during the crisis. His practical knowledge, combined with scientific data from the research project, helped shape regional drought response strategies. Tom Reynolds emerged as a crucial leader during this period, his farm serving as a second demonstration site for drought-resistant practices that benefited both crops and wildlife. The water management systems he'd implemented following James's example now helped sustain multiple species through the dry period, proving that conservation practices could enhance rather than hinder farm resilience. Amy Thompson's ongoing research took on new significance as she documented how the community's transformed relationship with wildlife influenced their response to the crisis. Unlike previous droughts that had led to conflicts between human and animal needs, this situation sparked innovative solutions based on cooperation and shared resources. The indigenous elders' traditional knowledge proved particularly valuable during this time. Their understanding of drought cycles and wildlife behavior patterns helped the community anticipate and address challenges before they became critical. Their wisdom, combined with modern scientific monitoring, created a powerful framework for crisis management. Dr. Peterson's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center saw an increase in activity as animals stressed by the drought needed assistance. The trust-based treatment protocols developed during the bears' rehabilitation proved especially effective in helping these animals recover and return to the wild. The center's success rate remained high despite the challenging conditions, demonstrating the durability of compassionate care practices. James found himself drawing on every lesson learned during the bear's rehabilitation as he worked to maintain balance on his farm. The crisis demanded constant adaptation and unwavering commitment to the principles of cooperative conservation. Each decision required careful consideration of both immediate needs and long-term sustainability. The research project's monitoring systems captured remarkable evidence of wildlife adapting to the drought conditions through cooperation with human activities. Bears would visit agricultural areas at night, careful not to damage crops while accessing water sources. Deer maintained grazing patterns that actually helped protect vulnerable plantings from erosion. These observations challenged traditional assumptions about wildlife behavior during resource scarcity. Local schools continued their educational programs throughout the crisis, using the situation as a real-world laboratory for teaching ecological principles. Students participated in water conservation efforts and wildlife monitoring, gaining practical experience in environmental stewardship while contributing to the community's response efforts. The media attention drawn by the farm's success in managing the drought crisis brought new opportunities for sharing their model of compassionate conservation. Documentary crews captured compelling footage of wildlife and farm operations coexisting harmoniously despite the challenging conditions. These images helped change public perceptions about the possibility of human-wildlife cooperation. International conservation organizations sent observers to study how Cedar Grove Farm maintained ecological balance during the crisis. The farm's integrated approach to water management, which considered both agricultural and wildlife needs, became a model for drought resilience planning in other regions facing similar challenges. The research project's findings during this period revealed something extraordinary. The farm's ecosystem actually showed signs of strengthening under stress. The cooperative relationships between species, including humans, created a more resilient system than traditional approaches to agriculture or conservation could achieve alone. James often reflected on how different the situation might have been if he hadn't chosen to help that injured bear years ago. That single act of compassion had initiated changes that now helped an entire community weather a severe environmental crisis. The trust built between humans and wildlife proved to be as crucial a resource as water during the drought. The crisis also revealed unexpected benefits of the farm's wildlife-friendly practices. Natural pest control remained effective even as insects sought refuge from the drought, while the diverse plant species in wildlife corridors helped prevent soil erosion and retain precious moisture. These advantages translated into better crop survival rates compared to conventional farms. Dr. Chen's team documented how the farm's adapted ecosystem supported endangered species during the drought. The complex network of habitats and resources provided crucial refuges for vulnerable populations, contributing to biodiversity conservation even under extreme conditions. This discovery added new dimensions to understanding the value of integrated farming and conservation practices. The drought eventually began to ease, but its lessons remained deeply embedded in the community's consciousness. The experience had demonstrated beyond doubt that compassionate approaches to wildlife conservation could enhance rather than diminish agricultural resilience. The crisis had tested their principles and proved their validity under the most challenging circumstances. As rain finally returned to the region, Cedar Grove Farm emerged as a living testament to the power of choosing cooperation over conflict. The drought had revealed the true strength of relationships built on trust and mutual respect, whether between humans and wildlife or between different species sharing stressed resources. The story of how the farm and its surrounding community weathered this crisis became another chapter in their ongoing journey of discovery. It proved that the principles of compassionate conservation could withstand even severe environmental challenges, creating systems that grew stronger through cooperation rather than competition. 5 years after that fateful autumn morning, James stood at the edge of his property, watching the sunrise paint the Vermont landscape in familiar golden hues. Cedar Grove Farm had become more than just a working farm. It was now a living symbol of how compassion could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities and ecosystems. A gentle nudge at his side drew his attention to Scout. Now graying but still alert, the Border Collie's family had grown, her descendants working on farms across the region, each carrying forward the remarkable ability to bridge the gap between domestic and wild. Their success had inspired a new breeding program focused on developing farm dogs that could work in harmony with wildlife. The morning's peace was broken by the arrival of Dr. Chen's research team, setting up their final round of monitoring equipment. The comprehensive study of Cedar Grove Farm's impact was drawing to a close, but its findings would continue to influence agricultural and conservation practices worldwide. The data had revealed patterns of cooperation between species that challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior. James made his way to the old dairy barn, now a thriving education and research center. The walls that had once sheltered an injured bear now displayed maps showing the spread of wildlife-friendly farming practices across continents. Photographs documented the transformation of landscapes, the return of native species, and the flourishing of communities that had embraced the principles of compassionate conservation. Amy Thompson, now completing her doctoral research, had expanded her study to include farming communities in Africa and Asia that had adopted similar approaches. Her work revealed how traditional ecological knowledge, combined with modern conservation practices, could create resilient systems that benefited both human communities and wildlife populations. The impact of their work had reached far beyond farming. Urban planners now consulted with James and his team about creating wildlife corridors in cities. Healthcare facilities had begun incorporating principles of trust-based healing learned from the bear's rehabilitation. Schools worldwide use Cedar Grove Farm's story to teach children about empathy, courage, and environmental stewardship. Tom Reynolds had become an international spokesperson for agricultural transformation, his passionate advocacy inspiring even the most traditional farmers to consider new approaches. His own farm had evolved into a demonstration site for advanced conservation practices, proving that economic success and environmental stewardship could go hand in hand. The indigenous elders who had supported their journey from the beginning now led regular ceremonies at the farm, teaching visitors about the sacred connections between humans and wildlife. Their wisdom, once dismissed by mainstream agriculture, had become an integral part of training programs for new farmers and conservationists. Dr. Peterson's veterinary practice had evolved into a world-renowned wildlife rehabilitation center, where veterinarians from around the globe came to learn about trust-based healing techniques. The protocols developed during the bear's recovery had revolutionized wildlife medicine, leading to dramatically improved survival rates for injured animals. The research project's final reports documented something extraordinary: the emergence of what scientists termed adaptive cooperation between species. Animals that would normally compete for resources had developed sophisticated systems of sharing and communication, creating more stable and resilient ecosystems than had been thought possible. Local schools had integrated Cedar Grove Farm's principles into their core curriculum, producing a generation of students who understood the deep connections between agricultural success and environmental health. These young people were now beginning to take leadership roles in their communities, carrying forward the vision of compassionate conservation. The drought crisis had become a case study in environmental resilience, demonstrating how farms managed according to cooperative principles could weather severe challenges while supporting both human and wildlife populations. The lessons learned during that difficult period had influenced disaster preparation strategies worldwide. James often thought about the bear whose arrival had catalyzed so much change. Trail cameras occasionally captured images of a large black bear with familiar scarring, thriving in the protected forest lands that now surrounded the farm. Whether or not it was the same animal, its presence reminded everyone of how a single act of compassion could spark profound transformation. The farm's success had challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between agriculture and wildlife conservation. Rather than seeing these as competing interests, a new paradigm had emerged that recognized their essential interconnection. The health of one supported the health of the other, creating systems that grew stronger through cooperation rather than competition. Sarah's presence seemed especially strong as James walked the familiar paths of his transformed farm. Her vision of compassionate farming had not only been realized, but had expanded beyond anything they could have imagined. The principles she had lived by had proven their validity on a global scale. International organizations had begun incorporating Cedar Grove Farm's model into their development programs, recognizing that environmental conservation and agricultural success were inseparable goals. The farm's approach offered practical solutions to challenges facing communities worldwide, from climate change to food security. The story of the farmer and the bear had become legend, told and retold in classrooms, conferences, and community gatherings around the world. Yet its power lay not in its extraordinary nature, but in its demonstration of how simple compassion could transform the world in unexpected ways. As James completed his morning rounds, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The choice to help an injured bear had seemed small at the time, but like a stone dropped in still water, its ripples had spread far beyond anything he could have imagined. The transformation of Cedar Grove Farm had proven that when people chose to act with courage and compassion, there was no limit to the positive change they could create. The future stretched out before them, full of new challenges and opportunities. But the principles that had guided their journey remained constant: trust, compassion, and the understanding that all living things were connected in ways that transcended traditional boundaries. These truths, proven through experience and validated by science, offered hope for a world where humans and wildlife could thrive together in harmony. The morning sun rose higher over Cedar Grove Farm, illuminating a landscape transformed by love, courage, and the willingness to see beyond. Fear to the possibilities that lay ahead. The story that had begun with one man's choice to help an injured bear had become a beacon of hope, showing that the path to healing our world began with the simple choice to act with compassion, even in the face of uncertainty. As James watched the farm come alive with the day's activities, he knew that their journey was far from over. Each day brought new opportunities to choose compassion over fear, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. The legacy of their experience would continue to grow, touching lives and transforming communities for generations to come. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of a larger story, one that would continue to unfold as more people discovered the transformative power of choosing compassion over fear, and the endless possibilities that arose when humans and wildlife learned to thrive together in harmony. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.